You know, every single day, huge amounts of fuel, food, and raw materials are crisscrossing the globe, moving between people who have literally never met. And it all works because of this invisible, super high-stakes system. It's built on paper, on promises, and on a very specific process. So let's pull back the curtain and see what really makes global trade tick.
Okay, let's start with a really simple question that has a very complicated answer. Imagine you need to buy a whole shipload of diesel fuel. I'm not talking about filling up your truck. I mean 100,000 metric tons of the stuff. And the seller? They're halfway around the world. You don't know them. You certainly don't trust them. How on earth do you make a deal like that without getting completely ripped off?
And this isn't just some thought experiment. A single shipment like that, based on today's market prices, is worth $59 million. The risk here is just astronomical for everybody involved. The buyer could send all that money and get absolutely nothing. And the seller, they could send their incredibly valuable fuel and never see a dime. Well, to solve this massive trust problem, global trade runs on a system that basically manufactures trust where there isn't any. It's a whole language of acronyms and legal documents that act like a secret code. And once you get that code, you'll see how the engine of the entire global economy really turns. So come on, let's start cracking it.
All right, first things first, we've got to learn the lingo. There are 3 key terms you absolutely have to know before we can even get into how a deal works. Think of them as the basic building blocks for this whole process. First up, incoterms. Just think of these as the official rules of the game. They answer one really simple question. At what exact point does the responsibility for the cargo, the risk, the insurance, the cost, pass from the seller to the buyer? We're going to focus on the 2 big ones, CIF and FOB. Next, you've got the SBLC or BG. This is basically the buyer's superpower. Instead of just saying, yeah, I promise I'll pay, the buyer gets their bank to issue this incredibly powerful document. It's a rock-solid promise from a huge financial institution that says, hey, we guarantee the funds are right here, and if the seller checks every single box in the contract, we will release the money. It totally replaces personal trust with cold, hard bank-backed certainty.
And on the flip side, you have the proof of product, or POP. This is how the seller proves they're legit. And here's the wild part. The buyer almost never physically sees the product before they pay for it. Nope. Instead, they get a pile of official papers, a quality inspection report, a certificate of origin, a bill of lading. It's all about the paper trail that proves the product exists and is exactly what they're paying for.
So, now that we've got the key terms down, let's see how they all fit together. You got to understand, this isn't a simple handshake deal. It's more like a carefully choreographed dance between 2 companies, and even more importantly, their 2 banks. Okay, here's the play-by-play. It all starts with a contract, right? Then, and this is the absolute key, both companies take that contract to their banks. The deal officially moves from the commercial world into the banking world. The buyer's bank puts up the SBLC, proving the money's ready to go. Then, the seller's bank answers back with a performance bond, which guarantees they'll actually deliver. It's only after these bank-backed promises are in place that the seller shows their proof of product. Then the shipment starts and the money gets released once it arrives. It's this perfect sequence of commitment, all managed by the banks. Now, remember those incoterms we talked about just a minute ago, CIF and FOB? Well, the choice between them completely changes the game right in the middle of that financial dance we just described.
And this lays out the difference perfectly. With CIF, the seller handles everything. They book the ship, they pay for the insurance, they manage all the freight to get it to the buyer's port. The price includes all of that. But with FOB, the seller's job is just to get the product to the loading port. From that moment on, it's the buyer's responsibility. They hire the ship, they handle the logistics, they're in total control.
And FOB can get even more specific. There are different flavors, you could say, depending on exactly how the buyer takes ownership. It could be a tank takeover, where the buyer literally takes over the lease on the seller's storage tank, or tank to tank, where the product is pumped to a different tank nearby, or the classic, tank to vessel, where it's pumped right onto the buyer's ship. Every single detail is spelled out. So we've seen the language, we've seen the process, but what's the real magic here? What's the core thing that stops one side from just bailing or cheating the other? Well, that's the financial safety net. It's all about this mutual, bank-enforced protection. The buyer's SBLC is a binding promise for 100% of the deal's value. In return, the seller's bank issues what's called a performance bond, usually for about 2% of the contract value. This is the seller's skin in the game. If they fail to deliver, the buyer can claim that 2% from the seller's bank as a penalty. See? Both sides are locked in and their banks are holding the keys. Check this out. This is a direct quote from one of these bank guarantees. I know, it sounds super dense and legalistic, but that little phrase, failed in their obligation, is like a magic word. It's the trigger. If one side can prove to the other's bank that this happened, the bank has to pay the guarantee. No questions asked. So, here's the main takeaway. We're not talking about a simple handshake between two companies. These documents are irrevocable instructions governed by global rules from the International Chamber of Commerce. Once they're issued, they can't be changed or canceled unless everyone agrees. Personal trust is completely taken out of the equation and replaced by something much stronger: institutional, legally enforceable trust. Okay, so we've been deep in the weeds of bank guarantees and shipping terms, but why does any of this matter? Why should you care about this complex, kind of hidden world? What's the big picture? Well, this is what makes our modern world go round. Seriously, every time you fill up your car, turn on a light switch, or buy something that was made on the other side of the planet, you are benefiting from this exact dance. It is the quiet, super reliable engine running in the background, making sure those multi-million-dollar handshakes between total strangers happen smoothly day in and day out. And all of that leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about. This whole structure of paper documents and physical inspections was perfected for trading barrels of oil. But what happens as we move into a world of new commodities, like carbon credits or massive data sets, or even complex biological materials? What does proof of product even look like then? How does this multi-trillion-dollar system adapt when the product isn't something you can just pump into a tanker? That's the next big challenge.